All right, welcome to Talk Mental Health with Logan, Noone. This is episode 4. We're going to be talking about ADHD, excuse me. I always mess that up. This is a medical student that has lived with ADHD since he was the age of 7. We're going to get into what he did to really manage his ADHD and get all the way to medical school. We'll be talking about other means of therapy besides just medication, but also how that medication is often abused and really how to handle that. This is a fantastic episode. Hope you guys enjoy it. So you are here today. We want to talk about it's ADHD, correct?
ADHD, that's right.
So, I mean, this is something that I feel like a lot of people joke about that, I'm ADD, I'm ADHD. But in reality, I mean, it is very prevalent in our society. So I'm excited to hear. Thank you so much. A little bit about you.
Yeah.
You're a first-year medical student. Absolutely killing it, president of student council at your medical school.
Yep.
And you live with ADHD.
Yeah.
So when were you diagnosed with ADHD?
I was diagnosed, think it back, probably 7 years old, 7 or 8. That's pretty young. I know a lot of people get diagnosed later, but I was fortunate enough to kind of get picked up early. Initially, it was a lot of just kind of the classic symptoms, ADHD, kind of disruptive in class, not paying attention, not getting work done. Smart kid. Mm-hmm. All teachers told me my parents I was a smart kid. I was getting things done, and we actually did a couple things to kind of keep me engaged, like give me my own packet of math multiplication tables to do when I completed mine, so I wouldn't distract the class. Things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't until a prompt from the principal, I believe, but she prompted my mom to go seek out a doctor about ADHD, get a formal diagnosis. So my mom looked into it a little bit first, then went and sought out a physician and get diagnosed, which was kind of a shock to her. And initially she was kind of about it, upset.
So now, are you the first one in your family to be diagnosed?
Yes.
You are.
And my mom, yeah. So she didn't know how to take it. She was a little bit kind of like reeled from it.
So you were only 7, so what, first, second grade or something? Super young.
First, second grade, that's right.
Because when I think of ADHD, at least the diagnosis or diagnosis of other mental illness, typically at the diagnosis, you're having emotions because of that disorder, like maybe isolation, maybe depression or anxiety, whatever it may be. But at the age of 7, when you're experiencing ADHD, I mean, I'm guessing you didn't really have very much mental health impact because of that, but am I wrong? Like, what was it like?
That's a really good point you raise. I think one of the issues right now we see a lot in the country is a lot of people will quickly jump to the conclusion because a kid's talking out or being disruptive that they have ADHD. There's no really looking into what might be manifesting in that kid. So definitely in my case, they diagnosed me potentially would have been early, but it did pan out to be ADHD in this case. But a lot of kids, I think, who get diagnosed probably don't have ADHD, and they're not getting medicated. They're not directly addressing the underlying problem. So I think that's a whole other topic, under mental health in this country.
Yeah, and we'll get there.
Yeah,
we'll get there. It's gonna be a good long podcast. So let's start at least. I know 7 years old though. Mm-hmm. So you're 7 years old. You're diagnosed. Mm-hmm. I mean, I imagine at the age of 7, you probably didn't even know what the hell this meant.
No.
Now, at the age of 7, did your parents decide medication was right for you at that point, or was it later on that you jumped on meds?
I think a little bit later on, more like 8 or 9, they kind of started experimenting with Ritalin, which is a lower potency to what I take now, which is Concerta.
Okay.
So typically I was given 5 milligram Ritalin to take each day, and then they bumped that up because it wasn't working up to 10. And then it was 3 pills up to 15. So at that point, it wasn't working. And then I think I was about 11 at that point, and they gave me Concerta.
Okay.
Concerta, which is the 54 milligrams that I've been on ever since.
Damn.
Which is a lot.
And you're how old now?
I'm 25.
And that is a lot? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say 54 milligrams for a kid who's about 11 to jump from 15 milligrams on Ritalin to 54 milligrams of Concerta. That's a pretty big jump.
So now, did you notice positive changes, negative changes then?
Absolutely. I know some great positive changes. My parents noticed it too. So I would say I was more focused. I was definitely not disrupted in class. I was able to kind of keep my comments to myself, so to speak. And we get my work done, stay on task, which is this really helpful for me, I think, at the time. And when I was off the medication, there was a huge dichotomy. You'd see, like, on the medication, I was good student, focused, respectable. You know, teacher would comment, hey, you know, you've got a good son. He's really not a great person in the class to have. And then when I was off medication, it was, oh my gosh, he's a living nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
So my parents would tell me, you know, if they would sense that I was kind of acting up, they go, do you take your pills today? I think it's a lot of, that comment comes up a lot with kids with ADHD. Do you take your pills today? Yeah.
So those periods when you were off meds, did you do that without mom and dad knowing, or?
Those, I would say, being so young and being on medication, it can be difficult to kind of keep that regiment of taking pills.
Dude, I'm 28 years old. It's still hard to take that regimen. Right. I mean, do you use one of those like pill dispensers like an 80-year-old person? I do. Initially,
yeah, I did actually. I used a dispenser. I would have my pill for the day. I'd take it, and then over time, I kind of got off that and became more self-reliant, more responsible, I would think, taking the pills daily. So now I honestly, every time I get up in the morning, I have my pills next to me in the nightstand. Just grab one, pop one in, on my way.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, just nice.
Yeah.
Because I tend to find I take my medication right before I go to bed, and it's gotten so much to the routine that I'll go to bed, you know, after brush my teeth, doing the normal stuff, taking the meds. Then I'll lay in bed, and I literally can't remember if I actually took the med.
Yep.
Because I'm just so accustomed to always taking it, but I can't remember that specific time. So that's why I've kind of moved to pill dispensers, but then I forget to fill the pill dispensers, and it's just a nightmare. But, so when did you kind of, well, I guess, did you have any reluctancy to use medication?
You know, there's a story my grandma used to tell me, or she still tells me, about my ADHD. She would mention that when I was younger and first got diagnosed, I was kind of acted a little, I was kind of scared, you know, a kid being told you have this disorder and that you need to take this medication for it. And so she recalls at one time that I had mentioned to her that I don't need to take my pills because I'm normal, just like you, Grandma. And she kind of got a little emotional at that point. But I don't think, other than that, I've never really thought that I don't need medication. I've always kind of realized that medication is something that's going to help me be successful. And having it when I was so young and just realizing that's a part of me has made it a lot easier. I do know a lot of people, I've met friends and acquaintances that have ADHD, and they started a lot later in life. And they've kind of gone through their own trials and tribulations about whether I should take the pills or whether I don't need the pills. And I would say the biggest thing with the pill, and the reason why I stay on it, is because once you're on the pill, you can see the difference. But also, it's when you're off the pill, you kind of, I don't want to say it's a withdrawal, but you definitely feel a lot different.
Yeah.
So, for instance, being on the pill so long, if I run out, which I try not to, if I run out, I will notice I'll feel very lethargic. Like I want to sleep. My appetite goes through the roof, especially if I'm, you know, just at home or not doing something, or even when I'm trying to do something, stay on task. It's not a matter of me concentrating, it's a matter of me staying awake sometimes, which is a really weird side effect to have. But so that's one of the things I would say it's a big factor that keeps me on the pill. Like I know that if I don't take the pill, I'm going to have these crazy kind of like not withdrawals, that's a bad word, but they're kind of like a side effect.
Yeah, certainly. So have you noticed any negative effects, though, of you being on this medication for so long? Or are you just so accustomed to it, I guess, at this point?
You know, there's been little things here and there, things that doctors may attribute to my medication. Things like, they've mentioned that a little bit of high blood pressure you might have from the medication. I would say, too, that the medication sometimes can make me feel, sometimes you can get too preoccupied with something. I know the medication is supposed to help you focus, but I feel that with just like people who take it who don't have ADHD, they get that kind of like really focused on one topic and they can't switch off to anything else. It might not be the thing they're trying to focus on initially, but it's the thing they get stuck on. So maybe a little bit of that. Not as much with me, but that's the only two things I can really think of. Other than that, I would say the medication's great, and I don't notice too much of a downside to it.
Okay.
Which is another reason why I've been on it so long.
Yeah. Well, so I want to ask you about something you just said about your grandmother.
Yeah.
So I know one thing that I struggled with, bipolar, disorder. And that disorder portion, they would tell me, oh, it's bipolar is a CEO disorder, all this BS, whatever. I mean, when I first got diagnosed, I didn't really know anyone with bipolar disorder besides like Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain and like all these other random celebrities. So you get diagnosed with ADHD, you're young, but you're in middle school and high school and maybe finally kind of figuring out what that really means. How do you get over that hump of I have a disorder, but I'm still capable of great things? Because obviously you are. You went to undergrad, you were a collegiate athlete, and now here you are in medical school, elected president of your student council, the whole school. So you're absolutely killing it. But how did you overcome that? Because I feel like a lot of people, whether they're diagnosed with ADHD or just really any disorder, they think like, well, now I'm screwed. Now I can't be successful.
Yeah. I would say you never overcome it. It's a constant battle. And in fact, just today, I would say little thoughts pop in the head every now and then. So like just today, big exam that we had a lab practical, and it was difficult, and there were some things on there. I'm like, I wish I would have studied more. I wish I would have been focused on this or this, and I wasn't. And so you kind of do this self-doubt. It's a cycle of self-doubt, reassurance, self-doubt, reassurance. And I think the trick with ADHD is that in that cycle, you have to realize that you have to get up one more time than you get knocked down by your own feelings of inadequacy or what have you. And realizing that it's not inadequacy that you have, it's just a different perspective in life. Because when you look around, the people that you're going to see out on the outside are probably not going to understand, or you're going to think they don't understand who you are or what you're dealing with. And you're going to think that they're normal. You're going to think that what they're doing, they're more successful, they look like they're doing everything right, and that you're doing everything wrong. I think that's the wrong perspective to have, but you're going to have it anyway. So the whole trick is to continue to remind yourself that ADHD and many other mental health things that we see in today's world, they're not disorders necessarily, but they're just different perspectives. And if handled correctly, you can even use them to an advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, I told you this earlier. I saw that YouTube video where this professor from University of Utah, he really didn't like the ADHD, the disorder portion, because he studied these, or he read this study at least, of these individuals in Kenya, and somehow they identified the ADHD gene. I don't know if it's really...
I've heard of that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's well accepted that this is the exact gene that's the ADHD gene, but whatever. He found that this tribe in Kenya, all that... they analyzed it was just men in this tribe that they were really trying to analyze in this study. And what they found is a much higher percentage of the men who were the hunter-gatherers actually had that ADHD versus the other men who had more sedentary jobs, and they were a little bit more diverse too. They had more responsibilities back in their community versus just the hunters who, their task, you got to get the food for the community. Because what he described is how ADHD is like this dichotomy. You can't focus on things and you're so scatterbrained, but then on the other side of the coin, you can get so crazy hyper-focused and into certain things. So have you felt that similar way? Or?
Oh yeah, 100%. I actually have stories that friends of mine and from undergrad could tell about me studying. I would be in our science building, and I'd be holed up in a little cubicle, maybe around 10 o'clock, and I wouldn't move from that spot for 6-7 hours, just straight studying, maybe barely eat, barely drink, just so preoccupied with what I was doing that moment, I'd lose track of time. I'd be very productive in that moment, but people would walk by and they'd catch me off guard and they'd say, "What are you doing? You're studying so hard. Why are you studying so hard? You're fine. Take a break or do something like that. Like, how do you sit there for so long?" And for me, it was nothing. I was like, I'm not doing anything different than anybody else. I'm just sitting here studying. But to them, apparently, I was in this crazy just focus mode. So I would say when you get these moments where something piques your interest or there's something you're very passionate about, you can enter that hyper focus, which is a huge plus for ADHD.
It's an advantage.
If you kind of point it, it's like a cannon. You can't really expect to have great accuracy at cannon, but you can point it.
Yeah.
So I I found that that's very useful for me. And I think it's even more useful now that I'm in medicine, because there's a lot of things about medicine that fascinate me. So it's not like undergrad where there were topics that just really didn't make me or didn't strike my interest. Mm-hmm. Here in medical school, it's every day there's something, oh my gosh, that's so amazing, or oh my gosh, I love this. This is great, which is, it's great. So it's finding your niche in life and using that hyper focus in that niche where I think a lot of people with ADHD can be successful, like the professor you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've been it's been an eye opener in medical school is how many students have ADHD here. Mm. And, I mean, maybe I was naive, maybe I was ignorant. I didn't really anticipate it that much, but it does seem like, individuals with ADHD, it really has nothing to do with aptitude. Mm. And, it's smart individuals, and then maybe they can hyper focus on their studies, and maybe they don't, focus as well elsewhere. But either way, these are smart individuals who are just killing it. I mean, look at yourself. So, all right. So now, to all those people out there who have ADHD, ADD, whatever the difference. You have ADHD, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So you take meds, but I know that's not the only thing you do.
Nope.
So what else do you kind of do to manage?
Well, one of the biggest things I think that people can do with ADHD to be successful is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's something like kind of having this internal filter, internal coach throughout your day, telling you, critiquing you, saying, hey, in this moment, people are talking, there's something that's really interesting that you want to mention and blurt out, but it's the wrong time. It's not appropriate. So you got to tell yourself, hey, be quiet, don't say anything. Hey, don't, just hold off. Or if you're in class and you're losing focus, you kind of come up with these little games to re-engage your focus, telling yourself, hey, if I can color code these, maybe I'll focus on the topic. Or if I can get through the next 10 minutes, I'll go do a jog. Or something of that nature. So it's little tricks, having that little life coach essentially in your head that can be extremely helpful. Much more so sometimes than the medication is alone. So
Definitely.
I think that's another thing that I see a lot of people maybe don't do as much with ADHD.
Yeah, certainly. They want the quick fix. They want the meds. Maybe they just kind of put on a show to get the meds. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that certainly later too. So I've done CBT too. Mm-hmm. I love it. I've talked about it in some previous episodes. So how'd you learn your CBT?
A lot of my CBT was actually self-taught. Which is kind of funky.
I did not expect that answer. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe it wasn't self-taught. Maybe it was my mom implanting inception. So my mom was actually a psychology major.
So she was Inception, Dream Within a Dream.
That's right. She taught psychology in high school. So maybe there were aspects of what she had mentioned growing up that I picked up on, and I started applying to my daily life without actually knowing that that's CBT. But irregardless, once I kind of got into college, into high school actually, and I actually heard of CBT, was I kind of put two and two together and said, hey, this is something I'm kind of doing right now. Let's do it a little bit better. And kind of looking into it a little bit more. What's the tips? What's the tricks that I can do? I did a lot of research when I was younger, and still to this day I do a lot of research on things that people do with ADHD or are recommended for people with ADHD that make them successful. There's an author, actually, a book of his I've read. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he's a doctor with ADHD. He is a psychiatrist, I believe, and he talks about growing up with it and the struggles that he went through, and he actually has patients of his that he talks about in his book who had ADHD and what they did to be successful. So reading that was really helpful for me too. Just seeing, number one, that there's a face out there for ADHD and what I want to do, like medicine. And there are other people, a lot of people he mentioned were very successful. People who are successful that are able to get by with ADHD. Mm-hmm. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's talk now about the wannabe ADHD. Because how I've been described, at least, I mean, I haven't taken, what are, I guess, category there? Stimulants or whatever medication there?
Something of that nature.
I know they're very related to, like, methamphetamines. And at least they're the same chemical structure as, like, recreational methamphetamines.
Absolutely. Yeah, methylphenidate's the one that I take, so.
Okay. And I know, so first, I guess, let's talk about, we'll go kind of into, like, using medication improperly, but for school reasons, and then improperly for recreational, more fun reasons. So I've heard of the, Ritalin, all these sort of drugs are like the steroids of medical school, or the steroids of any sort of school. What would you really say to someone who tells you that?
I would say, personally, I don't think that that's a way that you should approach something. In my mind, I take the medication because I need it to function to some extent. I've been on so long that I need it to function. I've grown accustomed to it. But at the same time, I think that the best way to deal with anything, with a disorder or not, is to figure it out yourself and to try it yourself first before you go to the medication. Now, in the case of somebody who doesn't have ADHD, that's not really an issue, but I would say that that's not something they should be using. I've heard of horror stories of people taking medication or getting kicked out of school because they got caught with the medication. So there's all these other things that you need to take into account besides that, like the fact that it's not exactly looked upon as a good thing.
Certainly.
So I just don't agree.
Yeah. I mean, it is tricky because I worked at an addiction center before I went to medical school. And so we would have these guys come in, guys and girls, but I just worked with guys, so I always refer to guys. But, so I'd have these guys I had 15 patients that I was dealing with in a halfway house. So they would do their treatment facility for a month. They lived in this halfway house, and then they'd work in the community and then still do, therapy at night or different classes or whatever. But a stipulation of the entire program, the treatment, and then also our halfway house, is no medication that could potentially be abused. So these individuals who, like you, actually might have needed it, weren't able to use it. But then we also had those people who were there who abused it. So it was this weird situation. So, I mean, do you know anything about ADHD and addiction, or can you speak anything on that?
I can speak a little bit to, I think, the drug itself and what I've heard. Like I mentioned before, Ritalin, Concerta, I believe it's Ritalin is actually speed on the street. People take it as speed. So people already use this as a drug. It's like you'd mentioned, something that helps them focus. And I don't know. I guess kind of phrasing your question again.
Well, I mean, it's just hard. It just sucks. I would sit with these guys, and I could see how bad they had their ADHD.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't even keep a normal conversation with me. And so it was weird. I never knew really how to advise these individuals who they had addiction issues, and they were also dealing with ADHD.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's a tricky situation. I know when I'm a psychiatrist, I'm going to have to, fight that dancer a little bit, I guess. Now, I think you and I are both lucky. I was diagnosed early in my life with bipolar disorder, but at the age of 22. But that's still early in the grand scheme of things for when people regularly get diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So, you are in the same way. You got diagnosed very early. And so I like to say me and you kind of had it easy, at least easier than everybody else. Because I think the easiest way to handle any disorder, whether it's mental or not, is catch it early. So a couple episodes ago, I had on Megan. And she's in an interesting situation because she just recently got diagnosed ADHD. So for all the listeners out there, hopefully Megan's one of them, or anyone out there who maybe just recently got diagnosed with ADHD, what would you tell them if they were sitting there here with us?
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a new world. I think it opens you up to. It's something that you now understand, and I think that's the biggest thing you can do with ADHD. It's the first step, and the biggest step is realizing that you have something that makes you unique, that makes you diverse from someone else. I like to say neurodiversity personally. And that's not a bad thing. It can be a good thing, and if you use it correctly. And you can now learn techniques. You can adjust how you study. You can adjust your daily life, how you plan things out, and things of that nature that'll make you more successful than if you didn't know that you had ADHD. A lot of people, I think, are kind of, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but I know there are people out there who are remiss to admit that they have ADHD, maybe they get a diagnosis and they can't cope with it, or they feel like they need to cover it up or hide who they are because they're ashamed of it. And that's not the right way to go about it, because now you're just ignoring the problem, and it's going to perpetually just get worse and worse and worse. I would say, me personally, coming into medical school, I had to be more organized than ever before. I'd be more focused than ever before, which means I had to change what I was doing in the past to make me successful in that respect.
Now, because you needed to do that, were you at all motivated to change your medication or up the dose, or?
No. Nope, I wasn't. And the reason why, I think, goes back to the whole thing I mentioned before, which is that medication is great. It helps you establish that baseline. In fact, there was a therapist that I went to initially to get some accommodations for testing. You need to go through this big, long, rigorous process if you want to get accommodations for any standardized test like the MCAT. So I went to her and I got the full evaluation. I think it was the Wessler score or what have you. And she had the perfect explanation of what the medication does for you. You are like a waveform, just huge waveform. You have highs and lows, crazy highs and lows, where you're focused and you're not focused at all. What the medication does is it brings you down to a more normalized straight line. You maybe don't get the benefits of the hyperfocus as much as you did before, but you don't have these crazy bad side effects. But it's just a normal baseline. You're not going to get anything really better if you take more and more medication. I think once you hit that normalized baseline, the medication that works best for you, it's not going to change with the increased dose. But what you can do is you can do like cognitive behavioral therapy. You can look at things in your life. You can simplify that'll take out some of the kickbacks from ADHD. So for instance, one of the big things for me is I would often lose things. I think a lot of people with ADHD will lose things. They get sidetracked. Where did I put my keys? Where did I put my badge? So things that I do is I put my badge on my key every time when I come home, and I hang it up in the exact same place. And now I know that whenever I go somewhere, I just grab that key and my badge is there. Another thing, I get a lot of ridicule for this, but I love it anyway. I have a ginormous backpack. Okay. But in that ginormous backpack, I have everything I need for the day. I have workout clothes on the bottom. I have all my books. I have my laptop. On the top, I have all my chargers. They're all stored away in a nice little pouch. Everything's organized. Organization is key. So getting that diagnosis is the first step to developing these techniques that'll make you more successful. And once you develop them, you'll realize that you're more successful than you ever thought you could be. I would attribute so much of my success to that organization.
Yeah. I really liked a couple of things you just said, because I remember I had a conversation with my mother specifically right after I got diagnosed, and her brother had bipolar disorder and sadly eventually ended up taking his life because of it. So, that's sensitive to our entire family. And I remember when I first was diagnosed, she was so saddened because she was like, I feel this is something that my genes gave you. I feel this is essentially my fault. And like, I'm sorry you have to go through this. And I remember I almost got in an argument with her because I was like, this isn't 100% bad. Obviously, there are bad things about the disorder, but looking at bipolar or ADHD is also an evolutionary advantage. I like to think of my bipolar disorder as my hyperenergy, my ability to be creative, and I think sometimes also in that manic state of mind, I do get kind of hyper-focused, maybe similar to what you were talking about. But that's how I really kind of learned to accept my bipolar disorder, is by thinking of it as it's not 100% bad, it's not 100% good. It's a little bit of both. Now, another thing you said is the wave analogy. You just said of it with your medication, and I just started grinning as soon as you said that, because I got the exact same analogy about my medication. Yeah. Rather, not waves as hyperfocus and inability to focus at all, but moods. As in, when I would get super happy and enjoy life and it'd be amazing, and then just crash. And so I'm currently on mood stabilizers. I take valproic acid. That's the generic name. It's the brand name is Depakote. I've been on it now for, what year is it? 6 years now. And that's really how it was described to me. It's like, we're trying to take you away from those crazy highs and those crazy lows. We're trying to keep you right there in that middle, a little bit more baseline, so you can be a little bit more stable. And I think because of that, it's also, I know people struggle because they don't get those highs that they really want.
Absolutely.
But I think if they can really think about how bipolar is an evolutionary advantage in my eyes. And with the help of medication, but not just that, also the therapy, the exercise, the regular sleep, you can achieve so much more than your pre-diagnosis state. So I thought you just said it beautifully right there, man. Nice job. Now, is there anything else you feel you want to say to our audience, whether it's about ADHD, whether it's about mental health?
I would like to kind of go off of what you just said too, talking about advantages. Some advantages. I don't think I've really touched on the advantages that I've witnessed with my ADHD. I think growing up with it, understanding it from a very early age, gave me that lens to view the world, made me feel like kind of an outsider. So I would do a lot of observing of other people constantly, seeing what they do, seeing how they react, picking up on little signals, little idiosyncrasies about them, kind of getting focused on those kind of things. And through that, because of my disorder, because of ADHD, I developed a skill to kind of read people, understand how they think, or try to understand how they think. Now, I'm not saying that I'm popular by any means, and I'm not saying that I'm the best person at navigating difficult situations, but I do know that that's made me very effective, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm on SGA, is because I like to read people, and I like to see when something's going wrong and pick up on it. Maybe that's why I want to become a physician too, is because they're constantly seeing how people are different from themselves and trying to help them reach that normalized state or whatever their best self is. Mm-hmm. So I would say ADHD's kind of gave me a better power of observation by necessity. I had to develop that skill. Another thing I would say, you mentioned it, I kind of mentioned, is that hyperfocus and creativity. Now, you mentioned creativity for bipolar disorder. I think a lot of people with ADHD have a similar creativity. Growing up, I was actually, well, I still am an artist. I do a lot of drawing and painting and stuff. Oh, I just saw that one up there.
Oh, nice. All right.
That I've done.
I like it.
So,
this too?
No, not that one. Can't do them all.
That's a golf course. That's my favorite.
I know.
Whatever.
A boring train station.
Yeah.
But anyway, so having creativity, having those spontaneous outbursts, having things you pick up on that you want to say, some of those are actually really good ideas. Mm-hmm. The founder of JetBlue has ADHD.
Hell yeah, I didn't know that.
That's
okay,
right. Yes.
Cool.
So in his ADHD, he talks about, which is one of my favorite quotes, he talks about ADHD saying that it's something that made me successful. Mm-hmm. ADHD made him who he was.
Yeah.
And so I think my ADHD has made me who I am. It's made me have these creative ideas that maybe nobody else thinks of, or thinking outside the box when everybody's kind of following a straight line. So in that sense, I am thankful that I have ADHD.
Yeah.
Because it's given me that. It's given me so much.
Well, one other thing I just kind of thought of. We've been talking a lot about this whole ADHD gives you this ability to hyperfocus in a sense, which of course can go the other side and, you can't focus at all. But you're one hell of an athlete. Mm-hmm. You were a football player in college. Mm-hmm. So did you feel your ADHD might have helped you in your athletic career?
I never thought of it like that necessarily, but I do know that that's been mentioned a lot. There are athletes out there like Michael Phelps, and I think, what's her name? What's the gymnast? There's a gymnast on the Olympic team, Celine, I believe it is. But they have ADHD, and I think there's a trend that you see sometimes with that. Like, this person's a great athlete and they have ADHD too. It's not because they're a great athlete, they have ADHD, or because they have ADHD, they're a great athlete. It's just by chance. But I would say, yeah, it does. It gives me a lot of energy. And once again, hyperfocus comes in. If I'm really interested in something, I'm going to work really hard at it. So I grew up really loving to play baseball. I was like baseball and football, a little bit of basketball too. So I remember going outside and hitting buckets and buckets and buckets of balls, working on my swing, working on my technique. Football, I remember working out, trying to build this muscle because I was so focused on getting better. Mm-hmm. So often I would out-train all my teammates because of that. And I think that was my ADHD kicking in.
Certainly. It sounds like it.
Yeah, me being focused. So I would say, yeah, it was an advantage for me.
Hell yeah. Nice. All right, well, we only have a few minutes left here. So it sounds like, you've done some therapy. Of course, you've been on medication for a while now. But going back to what we talked about 10 minutes ago or so, someone who's newly diagnosed, are there any resources that you can kind of point them to? And we can put these resources in the show links that you like.
Yeah. So there's a website. I'm going to space the name. I think it's CHADD. It's called CHADD, might be. Yeah, I think it's CHADD. It's a forum that people can go on. There's a lot of good research on there for parents. loved ones, family members of the person with ADHD. There's resources for people with ADHD. There's discussions between people who have ADHD on things that they do. It's a great site. They have articles. They have, I even think there's a search bar for local physicians who specialize in ADHD. Okay. You can enter your name and see who in your area can help you if you're looking to have a physician who's specialized in that treatment. So, yeah, there's some great resources for that. Another one.
Well, I'm also now thinking, we're internet broadcasting.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about the gram. Are there any ADHD Instagram stars or anything like that that maybe our younger listeners could look up to, or Twitter followers, whatever?
I actually pointed him out to you earlier.
Chad! Richard Wadsworth.
Richard Wadsworth. Okay.
PNWU grad, no big deal.
That's right. So Richard just matched recently from into Missouri, a school in Missouri.
Psychiatry residency.
For psychiatry residency. So Richard, I actually... Dealing with ADHD, as I mentioned before, it's highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows. Your constant cycle battling. So prior to actually getting into medical school, I went through this period of time where I thought I wasn't good enough. I had the scores. I had great MCAT score, like a 511 or something like that. Mm-hmm. I was able to get in where I wanted to get in. But I didn't think I was good enough. Mm-hmm. So I kind of searched around online and I came across this guy named Richard Wadsworth. And he has a blog. So I started reading his blog.
And we'll put his link in the blog in the show notes, but is it just richardwadsworth.com, or do you know?
Yeah, Richard Wadsworth, I think it is WordPress.
Okay.
Or something of that nature, yeah. But it's a blog, and it talks about, he kind of chronicles his journey with ADHD, starting from his diagnosis, which came later. I believe his was in undergrad. And having to come to terms with that, having to deal with the medication initially. He had periods of time where he was on and off the medication and how that affected him. He actually repeated a year, I believe. He talks about that in his blog and saying how he had to go through that and difficulties, but being successful and overcoming that challenge. All these things are super motivational to me because they said, number one, somebody with ADHD can do medical school. It's completely possible. Number two, here's a guy who just found out he has ADHD, was going through all the troubles of trying to deal with that diagnosis while trying to handle medical school. So if he's doing that and I'm coming into medical school with ADHD already understanding it to some extent, I can definitely do this. And number three, it gave me hope because he was able to be successful in the end. I actually reached out to Richard, and Richard, I've been in contact with him a couple times, and I've talked with him, and he's given me some good pointers and tips. He's very active in the ADHD world, being a spokesperson for it. So he's someone I would definitely reach out to if you're interested in learning more, if you're a medical student who thinks that they can't do it, or you're considering medical school and you think you can't do it because you have ADHD. Read this guy's blog, check him out, maybe reach out to him because he was something that pushed me to do medical school and got me to where I am today.
Hell yeah, man. Well, hell yeah. Let's end on that note. Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for coming here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
You're the man. And yeah, dude, thanks again. All right, and that is a wrap on episode 4. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this, please rate, subscribe, share with your friends. We have a lot of different podcasts coming up. Coming up, we have some really heavy ones dealing with sexual assault and abuse. We're also going to kind of be breaking away from just interviewing medical students. I'll be talking with a lot of mental health advocates that really helped me along the way get to this point where I am today, not only just into medical school, but how I learned to be a mental health advocate. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it.